Welcome to the very first project in my Stitch and Story collection. This little mushroom cottage started as nothing more than a sketch in my notebook. Today I'm going to show you how it becomes a printable pattern, how I transfer it onto fabric, and how I slowly build it into a textured collage piece using scrap stitches and just embracing the imperfect details. If you're new to slow stitching, I like to think of it as fabric collage meets junk journaling brought together with simple hand stitches. It's not about perfection, it's more about texture, layering, storytelling, and most of all, just enjoying the process. So I'm gathering things that inspire me, and although this video focuses on Mabel's mushroom cottage, the footage you're seeing here is from two different designs, the blooming teacup and a butterfly pattern. I didn't think to film the early stages of Mabel's cottage, but the process is exactly the same. Collecting inspiration, sketching ideas, refining the composition, and then turning that artwork into the stitch map. So I'm just gaining inspiration, and on this day I was very much inspired by this teacup, this fabric with the sketched butterflies, and these vintage motifs that were designed for quilts. All of my patterns start just like this, simply sketching with a pencil the idea until I'm happy with the result. I don't worry about making it perfect, like making a perfect outline like you would see with traditional embroidery, because once this transfers to fabric, it softens everything. And I also like to leave my little sketch marks because sometimes I like the idea of being able to have those to reference. When I'm adding my stitches, I might like to add those in, or the person that's creating with the pattern. I also just like the look of the sketched pattern more than the outline style pattern. I think this is where slow stitch is different, and this is why I love it so much, because we don't have to play by the normal rules of pattern making. We don't have to play by the rules at all. There are no rules. So once I'm happy with the sketch, I do clean it up digitally, getting rid of all the extra markings that are irrelevant to the final pattern, and so it can easily be printed and transferred onto the fabric. And here's an example of a completed pattern, but if we zoom in, you can still see a lot of my sketch marks there that I left behind. So there are tons of ways to transfer a pattern. Today I'm using the sunny window because it's simple and almost everybody has one. So don't overthink this step. You're just getting the basic shapes onto your fabric. The personality comes later. I do not trace everything onto the fabric. I just trace the basic outline, and then I go in and I add the details with my stitching. I'm using a really lightweight white cotton here for two reasons. One, so I can very easily see the pattern that I'm tracing, and two, it gives me the option to add watercolor or paint or dye the fabric later if I choose to. You can see here, I don't bother to trace nearly all the details. I use the pattern as my reference, and I just put the basic outline of what I need to reference on the fabric, and then I go ahead and print the pattern on cardstock. Here I used brown, and then I go ahead and cut out the shapes that I'm going to trace on the fabric. When I'm cutting out the shapes, I don't worry about everything being perfectly straight, perfectly matching the pattern. The beauty of slow stitching is it's very forgiving, and a slightly crooked edge here and there just adds to the overall design. So now I'm just sort of taking the different fabric remnants that I have and placing them together and just deciding what color scheme and what prints that I want to use. Whenever I start a piece, and it tends to have like this awkward stage where I'm working on it and I'm just like, this isn't working. This stupid? Like, is this going to come together? There's an awkward stage in the creative process, but rarely is the solution to give up on the piece entirely. I usually will add more layers or cut something off and add something different. And before I know it, I'm excited about how it looks and I can visualize where I want it to go and how I want it to end up. And if it actually gets there is always up in the air. But just all I'm saying is push through that awkward phase because it's almost always so worth it. I like to add a lot of different variety with the types of fabric. So, fleece, cotton, different weights, different textures, different styles, different prints, but cohesive colors. I prefer working with mostly vintage fabrics whenever possible, which is what I'm doing today. I prefer to add batting or a blanket or something to the back of my lightweight fabric because this makes things like getting puckering a lot less likely. And I also like the extra fluffiness and it creates more stability while I'm stitching. So, in order to keep it in place, I just add a bunch of glue with my glue stick here to the fabric. So I just go ahead and press that on and then I wait for it to fully dry. In the meantime, I'll go ahead and cut out my fabric pieces. Just a little tip so you don't waste your fabric. Remember which is going to be the right side facing up and trace accordingly. Once I cut out my fabric, I like to put some glue onto the center of each one and leave the outer edges bare because that's where my stitches are going to go. But by putting the glue in the center, it just keeps it in place while I'm doing my stitching, so it just makes the whole process a lot more easygoing and carefree. Now for the fun part of picking out thread. To me, picking out thread colors is almost like picking out paint. I love the idea of this really multicolored one. So I'm going to play around with that, which I've never used before, and then a few colors that I think complement the design. And I'm just doing simple stitches. I don't actually know a lot of hand stitches. I'm learning more as I go, but this is only like my second time trying a blanket stitch. And a few times I just did it wrong and then the thing about when I have this embroidery thread on is I can just snip the thread right off the needle, go back, try again. It's no big deal. I do prefer to work with embroidery thread and cotton pearl thread because I like the sheen of the cotton pearl thread and I also like crochet thread. All of these offer me different options and all of them do a decent enough like thick stitch and I like to have kind of thick chunky looking stitches, but it's just whatever you prefer. I decided it would be fun to go in and add kind of like a cloudy sort of whimsical sky and then I got the idea to go ahead and add in some grass and I did want to keep a fair amount of white in the background, but I just wanted to add something. This is my first time adding watercolor onto fabric, so I'm just winging it. I'm learning as I go how it behaves and just trying to get the effect I have in my head, which is just sort of like those fluffy blue daydream clouds. And this is how it came out. All the gray you see is from when I traced the pattern, so it's just marking the different areas that I'm going to go back and stitch and add fabric, etc. This is my favorite part. So adding embellishments and extra things. In this case, I decided instead of hand stitching all of the leaves, I wanted to add this three-dimensional like leafy trim. And I also had little ribbon roses and little beaded roses that I wanted to use. And this works out because I don't actually know how to do those like with embroidery stitches, but you can definitely do those with embroidery stitches, but I'm not that advanced. Here I'm doing couching, which is a new thing I recently learned where you basically stitch on both sides of a trim or a yarn or something that you want to attach. Like you could even attach a twig like from outside. You just stitch on both sides of it to kind of pull it onto the fabric. You can see me doing that here. Another way to say it is I'm tacking it onto the fabric in place. This is what I love about designing these patterns. They begin as just a simple drawing, but by the time the stitching is complete, they're full of texture and personality and all these little dimensional details that just cannot exist on paper alone. My patterns aren't meant to be copied stitch for stitch. They're meant to give you a starting point for your own creativity. And so the embellishment process will continue off camera. I only have so much memory on here right now, but I love the idea of adding little lace curtain onto the window there. And for the most part, I'm just going to be stitching outlines around all of my shapes and some grass for texture. And then I will come back and show you what it looks like. This is the final piece. I'm really happy with it. I love the colors. And I love the idea of doing this pattern with different seasons. I really like how the roof was that sort of brown denim and using that gradient thread around, we can see the transition from across all the different colors. There's, I don't know, I think that was fun, a fun detail. And I like I liked my idea of adding a little swirl like coming out of the chimney. And I really like the what the 3D embellishments add to it. Maybe I personally don't have the patience to do like a full-on embroidery design, but you do have that option if that's more your style. So I love how versatile these can become. We create a blueprint and then we're off and running from there. I could see creating this, and every time I create it will be different, which I love. If you'd like to make your own version of Mabel's Mushroom Cottage, you'll find the printable pattern in my Etsy shop. If you'd rather skip gathering supplies, I offer from time to time limited batches of a complete Mushroom Cottage slow stitch kit with the materials you'll need. So you can find everything linked below. And if you enjoy watching ideas turn into handmade pieces like this, I would love to have you subscribe because I have lots more patterns and slow stitch projects planned. Thank you so much for hanging out and spending this creative time with me today, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next project. Peace.